Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Deppen, and today I've got a new case study for you. This case study is on a note deal that just wrapped up for me less than a week ago. And I thought I would put this together for you, one, because it's fresh in my mind, but primarily because this deal had some weird twists and turns that I had not actually encountered before. So had a bunch of firsts. And this deal definitely did not go the way that I expected when I entered the deal. So I want to run through this for you. A lot of good lessons learned for me, and a lot of things in here I think you'll find valuable and hopefully entertaining. Definitely was entertaining for me. So this deal was on a land contract or a contract for deed in Redford, Michigan. So Redford, Michigan's a suburb of Detroit. I've not actually been there myself, but my friends in the Detroit area tell me it's a nice area. That's one of the reasons why I bought it. Closed on this note in August of 2021, so about, what is that, year and a half ago now, a little more than that. And I picked up this note as part of a package. I think it was six or seven or so notes that I bought at the same time from a friend of mine. I ended up paying 14,597 for the note. Originally, I was going to pay closer to 20, but I was going through the due diligence, found there was about over $5,000 in taxes due. So I worked that out with the seller and negotiated the price. So I paid about 14,500 for it, but I knew it was going to pay. There was a tax bill that was going to have to be covered one way or another, so I was likely going to be into it for 20. The unpaid balance was just under 28,000, and the loan payoff amount was 32,500. So that included some other taxes the lender had paid previously, which I actually kind of forgotten about later on in the deal, and some other arrearages. And then principal and interest payment was 275. So very small payment, right? The Zillow value on this house was over 100,000. So you got a borrower that owes maybe 30,000. The Zillow value is over 100,000. So I didn't bother pulling an actual BPO on this. I just pulled a property condition report through Dickey Baldwin. And so when I have those cases where there should be just an extreme amount of equity in the property, to me, there's not really a big point in bothering with the BPO. But I am getting the property condition report, which has photos, just so I can verify the place is in decent shape. So as long as it is, I know I'm going to have a lot of equity. 180 payments remaining, and loan was about 4 months delinquent. So not that delinquent, but I had some arrearages and this other looming tax bill. So it was a little weird to have taxes that far out of whack and the borrower not really that far behind. Like usually those two things go together, right? If the borrower's mostly caught up, usually the taxes are in shape. Or if the borrower is way behind on taxes, they're usually not making payments either. So this was kind of a weird case going in. My exit strategies, my plan for this deal going in, right? I mean, whenever you go into a deal, you want to think about what your exit plan is. Even if your plan is just to hold it, like let's say it's a performing loan, your exit plan maybe just be to hold it until all the payments are made, right? Um, and in this one, the loan was a little bit behind. So my plan was to work with the borrower through the loan servicer to get the loan reperforming. And a lot of these loans I have where the borrower's only a little bit behind. Usually you can like send them some letters, and sometimes they'll just get caught up themselves. Sometimes when the loan is bought and sold and they get the hello and goodbye letters from the loan servicers, it kind of triggers them. Something's changing and they just get it caught up on their own. But I figured if that didn't happen, then I could work with the borrower. I could put a forbearance agreement in place. Usually, the way I like to structure these is you got a forbearance agreement with a trial payment plan and then like a good faith down payment. Basically, typically the structure is look, make some kind of down payment so the borrower has skin in the game, and then the borrower makes 6 to 12 payments in a row, and then at that point, I'll reset the loan and I agree not to foreclose in the meantime as long as the borrower is following through on all of that plan. And then, of course, my fallback plan is always to go through with the forfeiture. Now, this would be a forfeiture technically instead of a foreclosure because this is a land contract and it's in Michigan, so you can do a forfeiture. A forfeiture is, you can think of it, they're technically a little bit different, but for the purposes of this podcast, you can think of it as the same of the for as a foreclosure. It's a legal process and where um, borrower's not making payments on a loan and you take the property back ultimately. Typically, a forfeiture can be a little faster and less costly than a foreclosure, but of course, mileage varies state by state and all of that. I felt like the forfeiture was very unlikely just because the borrower had so much equity in this, right? Like they would be kind of silly to let it go on a forfeiture unless there was something really wrong with the property. So the other thing you want to do, right, when you're going into the deal beyond thinking about your exit strategies is also estimate your ROI. So the scenarios I was seriously considering were ones where the borrower gets things back in shape. Now I did have this tax bill that I had to pay. So if I get the borrower to ultimately pay back the taxes, then I'm going to collect my, basically I'm not going to have to pay the taxes. So I'll only be into it for my $14,597 purchase price, plus a few other odds and ends expenses, of course. The payments I'm going to receive every month are $275 from the borrower, and then I'm going to have about $30 in servicing fees. So I'm going to get about 180 payments of $245 a month. And so with my purchase price, that works out to a yield over time of 19%. So that would be pretty darn sweet. Now, if I end up eating the taxes for some reason, which I wouldn't eat the taxes, but if I have to pay the taxes and ultimately roll those into the balance of the loan and stretch out the payments, because the payments are so small, that would stretch it out where I would receive 277 payments of 275 from the borrower minus 30 to the servicer, or 277 payments of a net 245 a month. And then my purchase price would basically be 20,000 because I would have had to pay the taxes. That would knock my yield down to 14%. Still pretty darn good. And I didn't call out too. This was a loan that I bought in my self-directed IRA at Quest Trust. So, these kind of loans that are going to make payments and have pretty high yields with equity protection in case I got to foreclose are the ones I really like to put in a self-directed IRA. The forfeiture scenario, I didn't study too closely because that looked like that was going to be unlikely because the borrower had a big incentive to avoid it and super lucrative if it happened because if you get a house that's worth north of 100,000, I'm into this deal for like maybe 20,000 and it's in remotely decent condition, I'm going to do spectacular. Like that's going to be a windfall if I get to go to the forfeiture scenario. So that was my thinking on the ROI going in. I'm figuring I'm going to make a really heavy duty double digit yield on this in the end. So closed on the deal, got the loan transfer through, began the loss mitigation process. Like I said, bought this through my self-directed IRA at Quest Trust. One thing I wish I would have done different when I set this up at Quest, this is an existing Quest account. For some reason, there was like a hiccup when they set this up. And even though I was buying a package of loans, some of the loans went into my LLC, and then two of these loans went into my self-directed IRA. And I put both of the loans on the same direction of investment at Quest, and I never got that untangled the whole way through. So what that means is this asset and one other were on the same investment under Quest, and they actually put it under the other property address. And so since this deal kind of went sideways on me and I ended up incurring a lot of expenses, it was just a big pain in the butt administratively every time I had to submit an expense pay to Quest. They called me like every single time, and I could never get them to split it into two separate investments, even though I asked them a number of times and practically begged them to do it. So it was just one of those little wrinkles that made this a little more annoying. So I got the servicing transfer. This loan was serviced at Allied and had it transferred over to Madison. The reason I did that, I actually have a lot of loans at Allied, and I like Allied, but for my self-directed, but those are all loans in my LLC. In my self-directed IRA, the only servicing account I have is at Madison, and I didn't want to bother opening up a separate account at Allied in my self-directed IRA just for one loan. So I transferred it over. Okay. So a loan gets transferred. Borrower's paying for a little bit, not that long, and then kind of stopped. So I had the servicer reach out to the borrower. I ended up on the phone with the borrower a couple times and just really wasn't able to make any progress on that at all. She said that there were issues with the roof, the property was in bad shape. She didn't know what she was going to do. Maybe she was going to walk away from it. And I said, well, let me go in and take a look at it. Maybe we can do cash for keys. And then she wasn't interested in that. And this was kind of getting at like the tail end of COVID. I had a number of loans that while COVID was going on, I kind of gave borrowers a little more slack than I ordinarily would have otherwise. And then by the time we got into 2022, kind of early mid 2022, I said, okay, COVID's over, and I started the legal process on actually several loans, including this one. So in May 2022, sent a demand letter to get the legal process going, gave up on the loss mitigation part. And now the fun begins and the legal process. So May 2022, send the demand letter, kick off the process. And the borrower fought hard throughout this, which is quite unusual, especially on a land contract. I mean, I have had this happen a couple other times before. Let me tell you, when the borrower fights, even if the borrower has no leg to stand on, it gets pretty painful and things tend to drag out. Even in a state that's relatively easy to work with, work in as a lender, like Michigan is. One of the big sticking points that caused all kinds of headaches is this is something I didn't catch in my due diligence process, is the loan contract had this really unique term in it, where when it was calling out the borrower's payments, it was a little confusing. It said, oh, and there's also going to be $25 a month for taxes. Now that was bizarre because the tax bill on the property was like 1,500, 2,000 a year. So I don't know how the monthly tax bill would have ever been $25. Plus, that was obviously not the permanent tax payment because tax bills go up over time. The borrower was arguing that that $25 is all she should have ever paid and that covered the taxes. So all of these like over these all these arrearages she had in lender advance taxes, she didn't need to pay. Now, never mind the fact that she wasn't even making payments. So she's arguing that I should only have to pay 25 a month in taxes, which she wasn't even paying that. So it was kind of a nonsense argument, but she definitely used that to her advantage to drag things out. The other thing she argued about was the amount of taxes. So when you don't pay taxes for a couple years, I'm here to tell you the interest and the penalties add up. So she didn't like how high the tax bill was in general. She didn't like all the penalties because she didn't pay the taxes. And then there were also some unpaid water bills that were rolled in there as well. So she was arguing over the cost of all this stuff, meanwhile, not paying anything anyway. So I don't know why she was bothering with that. But she was very good at dragging out this process. So there were a couple different hearings where this thing drug on. And then we got to one where my attorney asked me to attend, and I did this over Zoom. It's very, very rare as a lender that I get asked to show up in court. There's a few times I've been asked to because I've had an attorney say it was helpful, and I haven't just because I live in Colorado. None of my loans are in Colorado. They're all in other states. It doesn't make sense for me to get on planes and fly around to go to court. But this one was over Zoom, so I was on there, and I thought this was going to be kind of interesting. Um, so the hearing was super interesting. The borrower, this was kind of a trip to crazy town, honestly. The borrower was kind of all over the place, and then she started talking about the thing with the taxes, and then she started talking about how, well, the house is in bad shape anyways. It needs a roof, needs a water heater, and then she started saying, "Well, the house is in a bad neighborhood. It's right next to Detroit," which I just found kind of humorous. From what I understand, Redford's pretty nice, and I know there are definitely bad parts of Detroit. There's also very good parts of Detroit, some of which I've had loans in. But I thought it was funny that she was talking crap about the place that she has lived for a long time. And then I'm like, oh, this lady's all over the place. Like, we're gonna win this hands down. And then at like the last minute, the borrower goes, "Oh, I have an attorney." And the judge was like, "What? When did this happen?" And she's like, "Yeah, I hired this attorney yesterday." Yeah. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. There's no way on earth this lady has an attorney. And the judge says, "What's the attorney's name?" And I can't remember what the borrower said, but the judge is trying to look it up. And the judge is like, "I don't see an attorney by that name on the bar. Can you spell it for me?" And the borrower spells it. And then the judge spells it back. And they're going back and forth on the spelling like 5 times. And the judge is like, "I don't see this dude. This dude's not an attorney." And I'm like, wow, this lady is completely lying and got nailed. And then the judge goes, "Hey, wait a minute. She found the name of an attorney where like the first name was the same and the last name was like one letter off." And she's like, "Is it this?" And the borrower says, "Yes." And then the judge says, "Is it spelled like this?" And the borrower says, "Yes." And the judge says, "Well, that's not what you said before." And the judge says, "Yes, I did." And the judge was just getting like completely exasperated and pissed off at the borrower. I mean, this was just getting weird. I'm not, I'm not an attorney that much about going to court, but just like antagonizing the judge doesn't seem like a great play. But the chef's kiss on this whole thing was when the borrower said, "Okay, rescheduling another court date. It's going to be in," I think she said like 2 weeks, whatever, on this date. And she's like, "You need to be here," told the borrower, "You need to be here in person, and this attorney needs to be here in person as well." And the borrower's response was, "On my birthday?" Yeah, she was upset. Apparently that was her birthday. And I didn't actually go back and verify if that was her birthday or not. And now the judge was really exasperated. She's like, "Yes, I don't care if it's your birthday. You will be here." And while the midst of this is going on, I had to turn my camera off because I was trying just not to lose my stuff and crack up. Um, my attorney was amazing in that I don't know how I talked to him afterwards and I was like, "Dude, how did you keep a straight face through the whole thing?" It was kind of like an episode of Judge Judy or Jerry Springer or some weird TV show where they have lunatics going bananas. So anyhow, that was an interesting court date, but then the case continued on. So apparently she did in fact have hired an attorney. And then a couple weeks later, the attorney wrote this letter to the court and dropped out. So that delayed things some more. It was a little unclear why he dropped out. My guess is she didn't pay her bills. This lady doesn't pay bills for anything, right? Like, so she probably didn't pay the attorney either. And that's another good point too. I kind of wondered, like, if you're an attorney who defends borrowers in these kind of cases, like, how profitable is that to represent clients who are known for not paying bills? That seems like kind of a tough profession. I'd rather be on the other end of it, but that's me. So that created some more delays, and then we had the next court date coming up the end of this month. I think it was supposed to be like March 26th. And the borrower contacts my attorney's office. My attorney calls me and says, "Hey, the borrower's offered to pay 40,000 to just pay off the loan." And at this point, with the lender advanced taxes and arrearages and blah blah blah, she only owed about 43,000 total, right? So offering 40 when she owes 43 is like a huge offer. Like usually when I've had borrowers make payoff offers in these situations, they'll offer like maybe half, right? Like I would have expected the borrower to offer like 20. Or I had one guy one time that owed 30 that would offer to pay it off for 5, which obviously didn't do. So I figured this is another delay tactic of hers. I'm like, I know exactly what this lady's going to do. She's going to say, will you accept a $40,000 payoff? I'm going to say yes, which of course I would. She's not going to follow through on the payment. Then she's going to show up in the court date in a week or two and say, oh, we don't need to finish this forfeiture because we have an agreement to pay it off. I just, there was this reason why I haven't sent the money yet, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. And then, and on from there. I'm like, I know what this lady's going to do. So when I talked to my attorney, I was really clear about, listen, of course I would accept a $40,000 payoff. There's no question, but I don't want this in any way, shape, or form to create a delay. Like, we continue with legal. There's no written agreement. If she wants to send it, great, but make it super clear to her. If it's not received before the court date, like, there is no deal. And he assured me, yeah, no worries. Like, I won't let her use this to delay it. So I'm like, okay, great. So we wait for court. And then last week she sent a wire for $40,000 to the servicer, which I would have bet somebody a lot of money that that would never happen in a million years. But I was obviously doing a pretty big happy dance at that point. This is, yeah, it was pretty shocking. Definitely good news, but something I did not expect. And it begs the question, right? This lady doesn't pay taxes, doesn't pay water bills, maybe doesn't pay attorney bills, doesn't pay a $275 house payment, and then she coughs up 40,000 in cash out of the blue. So kind of unexpected. I have had borrowers in the past who have coughed up big reinstatements that I didn't expect. In fact, I've had three of them between five and $7,000 where it was a similar situation where the borrower would not make a payment to save their life, and then all of a sudden they make this large payment. But this one at 40,000 just to pay the entire thing off was kind of in its own league for me. I had not seen that one before. So let's kind of recap the timeline, right? So closed this deal in August of 2021, started the legal process May of 2022, got the payoff in May of 2023. So I was a year deep in the legal process by the time this happened. And, typically forfeitures on a land contract in Michigan, they're like a couple of months. It's like 3, 4 months, maybe. I've done a bunch of them there. So dragging out for a year is pretty impressive. But what I was expecting was, she hadn't sent the payoff, is that, hopefully I would have gotten judgment at the end of this month. Who knows? Maybe there would have been a delay. Even if I get judgment, I was assuming I was going to have to evict her. That's its own process. That process can take a long time. Then once I evict her, usually in that situation, people leave a lot of junk. I might have to do a clean out. I got to sell the REO, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully I would have gotten out of the deal like by the end of this year. And the other problem with these deals that drag out is your expenses really rack up, right? Like servicing costs, taxes, forced placed insurance, all those things are racking up as you go. And usually those borrowers who just ride the ship down live a rough lifestyle. And usually the property is really beat up by the time you get it back. And that's those high expenses plus getting a property back in rough shape is a nice recipe for getting upside down on a deal. In fact, I was anticipating getting upside down on this one. So I was ecstatic to come away with a profit. So what were the final returns? Total cost basis, if you look at the price of the note, the 10,000 over $10,000 I had to cough up in taxes, legal fees, servicing. I don't actually think I've got all the legal bills yet. Total cost basis about $30,000, and I got 40,000 back. So, nice little 30 some percent ROI, which was pretty sweet. I did plug this into Excel and looked at the annualized ROI. So the annualized ROI is a little funky because the costs were incurred at different times. So the whole deal was about, a little over a year and a half. But the annualized ROI was still about 21%. So actually better than what I had anticipated, if the loan had just made payments as I originally expected, which it didn't. However, it was also a lot of work and administration and keep up. And Karen, my faithful assistant definitely spent a lot of hours on this as well, and I think she had the county on speed dial trying to figure out all the taxes stuff for a while. So definitely big thanks to her for, pulling this together really efficiently. Um, but for me, some questions loom, right? And there's some things here I can't necessarily answer that are worth pondering. One, why did she offer so much for the payoff? If she owed 43, why did she offer 40? Did she think, well, a little discount is better than none because she didn't want to lose the house? It's likely the house was in decent shape and not in bad shape like she had claimed a few times, but it seems a little odd that she wouldn't have offered less. I don't know why she offered so much. And maybe if she's willing to offer 40, I mean, maybe she was willing just to pay off the whole thing. Because if the house was really worth north of 100, it's stupid to let it go, right? It's better to find a way to pay it off for 40 or even 43 if that's what it takes. But of course, if you're there, why not just make payments? Like I was trying to work with her throughout the whole thing. So that didn't make any sense to me. And then the big question is, where did she get $40,000? Like, not many people can cough up $40,000. Now, maybe she got a loan to refinance it, but like I said, this lady's credit rating has to be zero. I mean, she does not pay bills, so I don't know who in her right mind would have lent her $40,000. So, I don't know. Did she borrow it from a friend or a family member that she's going to stiff? Is there a dead drug dealer down the street missing a stash? Were there any bank robberies in the local area? I didn't bother to check the crime blotter because honestly, I don't want to know. But I'm I am kind of curious where she got that from. Um, and then the other question, right, is she didn't pay for so long. She let the taxes go for so long, which racked up interest penalties and other fees from the county only to pay it all off in the end, right? So I mean, she ultimately paid a lot more money than she ever needed to. So why would she have done that? Did she really think that that weird tax term in the land contract was going to be like the magic loophole to let her live rent free for life? I don't know. It definitely didn't make sense because it's definitely, even though she paid 40 instead of 43 net net, she's paying a lot more than she should have. She could have, back in time just paid the whole dang thing off for 27. Uh, and then the other question is, and this is not a question of mine, but as I was relaying the story to a few different people, I got some questions about, well, because one of the things is I would have accepted a lot less than 40, right? My cost basis was 30. I sure as hell would have accepted 30. I probably would have accepted 25 because I was anticipating going upside down. And this whole thing was kind of a time suck. I wanted it off my plate. And so one thing somebody asked me is, well, if you were willing to send less, why didn't you call her up and tell her you would have accepted less? And I'm also, had to sign a deed. So like I'm deeding this over to her now and transferring the property because she's paid off the loan. Someone said, oh, why don't you just take your sweet time signing over the deed? And the answer is that stuff is really petty and doesn't make any sense to do, right? I think one of the things to remember in this business is that it isn't personal. Like we do want to do right by borrowers, right? We definitely don't want to do wrong by borrowers. We want to help them out when we can, and that's an easy thing to do because in most all of these deals, my interests as a lender are very aligned with the borrowers. That's why we work together to come up with deals that keep borrowers in their homes, so I receive cash flow, and that all works out. So, this isn't personal stuff. Don't ever take anything personally from borrowers or start to get petty or vindictive. Plus, if you do that, you're going to be spending time with things that don't gain you anything or earn you any time, any kind of return. So if you're in this game, like, don't even go there. It's not worth it. Um, so what were the lessons I learned? And I don't know that there were any brand new lessons that I learned, but this kind of kind of reinforce some things that I had learned in the past. And number one is, this is where my model's different than some, is I don't like buying a note deal unless I'm willing to take the property back and take the legal process all the way to the end. Some people have the model where they'll buy a loan, or if it goes non-performing, they'll just sell it to another investor, take a haircut, and move along so they don't have to deal with legal or deal with REOs and all of that stuff. And I totally get it from one standpoint because those are a giant pain in the butt. Um, but what's nice about being willing to follow through is one, it enforces a certain level of discipline when you're doing your due diligence and screening these in the front, right? You'll pass on sketchy deals that could get you in trouble. And the other thing it does is it gives you the chance of these magical payoffs that show up at the end. The only reason I got the 40K is because it was clear I was taking this one all the way to the mat. Now, one caveat with that, right, is you got to make sure you've got the funds on hand to handle those expenses and carry it if you need to. I have known investors more with larger portfolios where they have to take a bunch through legal, but then they don't have the cash on hand to take it through legal, and then it starts to limit what they can do. So don't put yourself there, but I definitely like going into these being willing to go all the way to the end and take the property back. The second lesson learned is that borrowers can surprise you with big payoffs and reinstatements. This was the first big payoff surprise, but I had other reinstatements before. It's always interesting when borrowers do when push gets to shove. Um, and then the other one is if your borrower does fight you in a forfeiture or a foreclosure, it really stinks, right? It creates a lot of headaches, drags out your timeline, gets expensive. You got to do all the work to keep up with that stuff. So even in a state like Michigan that's relatively easy to operate in, they can really stretch out your timelines. So that's my recent deal that I just closed in the last week, and I thought I'd share that with you while it was all fresh in my mind. So I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got something out of it, and I will see you next time. Thanks.